Montana Territory, 1883. The wind carried dust across the train platform at Dry Creek Station, and Gwendolyne Zeller stood taller than every man around her. Her boots touched the ground like they did not belong there. She clutched her carpetbag tight, the seams nearly splitting. Her chin stayed high, but inside, her heart was folding in on itself. She had come all this way by rail 3 weeks from Ohio to be a bride. A mail-order bride, to be exact. Promised in letters. Promised a home. Promised a man. But the moment she stepped off that train and the townsmen saw her height 6 feet and a half inch, they turned away, like she carried illness. A man in a preacher's coat whispered to another, "Looks like she could throw a horse." "She'll never find a husband up here," someone else muttered. Gwendolyne heard every word. By sundown, the platform emptied. The last wagon left, leaving dust and silence behind. Her husband-to-be, Mr. Arnold from the letters, had taken one look, gone red in the face, and said, "You lied." Then he rode off, not even bothering to help her lift her bags. She did not cry. Not there, not in front of them. Instead, she walked to the edge of the platform and sat, carpetbag beside her, looking out at the hills turning gold in the dying light. Her stomach ached from hunger, her feet hurt from standing, and her heart. Well, she had no words for that. "Ma'am," a deep voice came from behind her. She turned, startled. A tall man stood beside a dun-colored horse. He wore a battered hat and a trail coat dusted from hard riding. His eyes were steady, warm, and kind. He looked like he knew disappointment and chose not to offer it to others. "I saw what happened," he said. "Name's Ransom Whitlow." She stood slowly, brushing off her skirt. "Gwendolyne Zeller."
He tipped his hat.
"You waiting for someone?" "I was." She swallowed. But he changed his mind. Ransom's gaze held hers. His loss. She blinked, not sure she had heard him right. "Excuse me?" "He was a fool," he said simply. "You hungry?" She nodded, too tired to pretend she was not. "Come on." He offered his hand, but she hesitated. Her eyes dropped to the horse, then back to him. "I do not ride well," she said. "You will not have to." He stepped forward, placed his hands gently on her waist, and in one sure motion, lifted her up onto the saddle like she weighed nothing at all. No one had ever done that. She stared down at him. He met her eyes with a quiet steadiness, then swung up behind her. "Hold on," he said.
She did.
They rode through open country, the hills rolling out wide beneath a purple-blue sky. The silence between them was easy, not awkward. His warmth pressed behind her back. She had never sat so close to a man before.
Not this way.
Not held like this. They reached a small homestead just as the stars began to show. A 2-room cabin, barn, and a hen coop. Smoke curled from the chimney. "You live here?" she asked. "I do." He helped her down, and again, his hands were gentle. He opened the door for her, and inside, the room was simple, clean, and smelled like stew. "I have extra," he said, already heading to the stove. She took a seat at the table. Her knees trembled, not from the ride, but from the way he had not looked at her like she was a mistake. He placed a bowl in front of her and sat across. "You can stay here tonight. There is a cot in the other room." "You do not even know me." "I know enough. You got stood up, and that is not right." She looked down at her bowl. "Thank you." He nodded. "Folks around here forget what matters. You got spirit. I can see that." She glanced up. "You are not afraid I will knock over your house with my height?" That made him chuckle low in his throat. "I like tall. Makes it easier to look someone in the eye." Something in her chest warmed. They ate in silence. When she finished, he showed her the cot and brought in an extra quilt. She stood there awkwardly, hands folded. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not," he said. "You are just someone who got a bad deal." She looked at him a long moment. "Why are you being kind to me?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Because I know what it is to be left behind." That night, she lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling beams. The wind sighed outside. She heard Ransom's quiet breathing from the other room. She had come here to be a wife. Instead, she had been lifted onto a horse by a man who did not flinch at her height, who looked her in the eye, who gave her a place to rest. She did not know what came next. But for the first time in weeks, she did not feel alone. And something in her heart, something small and stubborn, began to hope. At first light, Gwendolyne stepped outside barefoot. The grass was damp from the night, and the sky above the hills was the color of pewter. She stood still, arms folded, watching the sun edge over the slope. The cold pinched her cheeks, but she let it. It made her feel real. From inside the cabin came the scrape of wood on iron. Ransom was already up, tending the stove. She hadn't heard him rise. She turned when he stepped out. He carried 2 enamel cups, steam rising from each. "Coffee strong," he said, offering her one. She took it carefully. "Thank you." He leaned against the post, his coat thrown over one shoulder. "I'm riding fence today." Spring snow brought down a few rails. She sipped. It was bitter, but it warmed her hands. "Is there something I can do while you're gone?" His glance flicked to her face, not searching, just taking her measure. "You don't owe me work." "I don't like sitting idle," she said, steady. After a moment, he nodded toward the barn. "Hen house could use a sweep. And if you haul water, take the bucket with the copper patch. The other one leaks." She gave a small nod. "I'll see to it." He met her eye again, then mounted without another word. The horse's hooves faded into the distance. She set the cup down on the porch rail and rolled her sleeves. By mid-morning, her dress was damp at the knees, and straw clung to her skirt. The chickens had scattered at first, but quieted once she'd laid feed. When she pumped water from the well, she counted the strokes. The patched bucket held fine. Inside, she scrubbed the basin and hung the towel to dry. Her back ached, but it was nothing she hadn't felt before. She had worked in her father's fields when he fell ill, and later, in a seamstress shop where she bent over fabric until her hands went numb. The ache meant the day was honest. Afternoon sun pooled through the small window. She stood in the doorway, brushing dust from her palms, when a wagon creaked up the trail. A woman drove it, her sleeves rolled, bonnet askew. 2 children sat beside her, a boy and girl, both with sunburned noses. The woman waved. "You the one Ransom took in?" Gwendolyne stepped forward. "I suppose I am. I'm Nora Talbot. That's my place yonder, past the ridge. I brought eggs to trade, but I heard he'd gone off mending fence." Gwendolyne took the offered basket. "He did." Nora's gaze traveled the length of her, not unkindly. "You're not from here." "I'm not." "Well, I hope you stick around. Ransom could use someone who knows how to stand tall." Gwendolyne stiffened, but the woman's tone held no mockery. "I'll let him know you stopped by," she said. Nora nodded, flicking the reins. The children waved as the wagon turned. Later, when the sun dipped low and the wind picked up, Ransom returned. His sleeves were rolled, shirt damp from sweat, and a smear of mud ran along his forearm. He tied the horse, then stepped up to the porch. "Smells like cornbread." "I found cornmeal and lard in the bin," she said. "Hope you don't mind." He stepped inside, glancing toward the table. "Not a bit." She served without ceremony. He ate quietly, pausing only once. "Nora stopped by," he said. "She did. She's decent folk. Lost her husband in the winter of '79. Gwendolyne wiped her hands on her apron. "She said you could use someone who doesn't flinch." "I didn't ask her to say that." "I know." He looked at her, something unreadable crossing his face. "You planning to stay long?" She held his gaze. That depends. On what? On whether you want someone who will be honest with you. He didn't blink.
I reckon I do.
She nodded once, slow. Then I'll stay for now. Neither smiled, but something between them steadied. Not promise, not yet, but something close. The first real rain of the season came 2 nights later. It started with the low hush of wind through the cottonwoods, then built until it drummed steady on the roof. Gwendolyne lay awake on the narrow cot, listening to it. The sound filled the dark like breath in a chest, steady and wide. She closed her eyes and tried to let it settle her, but her mind drifted first to the train, then to the platform, then to the moment she'd felt the saddle beneath her for the first time. The next morning, the world smelled different, darker, richer, like stone and new leaves. The dirt path outside the cabin had turned to thick mud, and the chickens refused to leave their coop. Ransom hauled in wood, boots caked, shoulders hunched against the lingering drizzle. "Barn roof's holding," he said, setting the bundle near the stove. "But the south pasture'll be too wet for riding." She poured what little cornmeal they had left into a bowl. "I could try to patch the hem of your trail coat. The thread's loose along the bottom." He looked toward the coat hanging by the door. "Didn't notice." "You wear it often," she said, not looking up. "It's earned the care." He drew closer, then paused just beside the table. "You always notice small things?" "Only when they matter," she said, threading her needle. He pulled a chair and sat across from her. The silence stretched, not heavy, but watchful. "I wasn't always out here alone," he said. "Had a brother. Younger. We built this place together." She glanced up, thread paused mid-stitch. "He drowned in the spring of '81, he said. River ran faster than he expected. Water don't always give you a warning." She didn't speak, just folded the cloth tighter in her lap. He leaned back, rubbing his jaw. "After that, I kept the land, but I didn't see much reason to speak more than needed. Until you." She tied off the stitch slowly. "I know about silence. My mother used to say it was better than lying." He tilted his head. "What did your father say?" "He said I'd never marry if I didn't learn to shrink." He didn't flinch. "You listen?" "No," she said. "But I tried." The fire cracked between them, soft and low. Wind moved against the shutters. "I've got a spare plot north of the house," he said after a moment. "Good soil. If you're staying, you might want to plant something come May." She looked at him, needle still in hand. "Are you offering me land?" "I'm offering you a place in it," he said. "If you want it." She rested the mended coat across the table between them. "I don't need much." He nodded. "Neither do I." Later that day, she stepped into the yard with a spade and began turning the edge of the north plot. The soil was wet and thick, but it gave. She worked until her arms ached. Ransom didn't interrupt. He repaired a loose hinge on the barn door, then led the mare out to graze along the dry edge of the trees. When the sun dropped low enough to turn the puddles gold, she stood back and looked at the line she'd carved from the earth. Ransom walked over, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You don't waste time." "I don't see the point in waiting," she said. He shaded his eyes. "You'll need seed." "I saw a jar of dried beans in the root cellar." He gave a slow nod. "That'll do." They stood side by side then, not speaking. The wind had dried the worst of the storm, and the air held the smell of pine and damp cedar. "I've never known a man who looked me in the eye without trying to guess what it cost me to be tall," she said. "I've never known a woman who looked at my land and saw what it could be instead of what it's lost." She turned toward him. "Then maybe we both have something worth staying for." He reached for her hand, not abrupt, not unsure. "Just steady." She let him take it. When his fingers closed around hers, they were warm from the sun and rough with work.
She didn't move away. She didn't want to.
By early May, the snow in the shaded ravines had thinned to threads, and the earth gave off a scent like crushed sage. Gwendolyne knelt in the garden row she'd carved weeks before, pressing split bean seeds into the soil with slow, steady fingers. Her palms had gone calloused in the right places. Her dresses no longer dragged in the dirt when she walked, they'd been hemmed to match the work. From the barn, she heard Ransom hammering a new plank onto the hayloft ladder. He'd cut the wood himself from a downed aspen along the creek bed. She hadn't asked why he'd chosen to fix it now, but she'd noticed the way he'd watched her when she climbed the loft last week to fetch the canvas tarp. She stood, brushing her palms against her skirt just as he approached, carrying a tin pail of nails. "You left your gloves," he said, holding them out. She took them, but didn't put them on. "I can feel the soil better without them." He set the pail down on the porch rail. "You planning to plant anything beyond beans?" "If you're partial to potatoes, I saw a few sprouting in the root cellar. I could cut eyes from them." He ran a hand along the porch post. "That'd keep us fed come fall." She nodded, then added, "I've been thinking about building a drying line. That patch behind the coop gets the most sun. I'll help you stretch the rope." She looked toward the ridge, where the pines caught the light like green fire. "You always this agreeable?" "No," he said. "Only when I mean it." That made her smile, small and true. "I don't take that lightly." He leaned one shoulder against the post. "Neither do I." She walked past him to the porch and set the gloves on the step. "I'm not used to someone letting me decide things. You shouldn't have had to wait this long." She turned slightly, not quite facing him. "I used to imagine what it'd be like, marrying a man I hadn't met. I thought if I worked hard enough to be useful, he'd come to love me anyway." He stepped down beside her, boots quiet on the packed dirt. "What changed?" "I stopped thinking usefulness was the same as love." He didn't reach for her. He didn't need to. The air between them had changed, denser, warmer. She felt it without looking. "I've been thinking about building a second room," he said. "Not because I need one, but because I want space for something that's not just mine." She blinked once, then looked at him. "You're not asking me to be your wife." "Not yet. But you're building a room. I'm saying I want you to know this place could be yours too." She let the words settle between them, like dust in a still barn. Then she stepped closer, not touching, just near enough that he would feel it. "I'd like that," she said. He didn't answer right away. Then he gave a single nod. "All right then." They stood like that until the sun tipped past the ridge. He went to fetch more nails. She turned back to the garden, planting the rest of the row without gloves. The wind carried the scent of pine and new growth, and the beans lay quiet beneath the earth, waiting for the right hour to rise. The second room rose slow and square behind the original cabin wall. Gwendolyne helped where she could, sanding the planks, holding the frame while Ransom hammered, fetching water from the pump with her sleeves rolled above her elbows. The work was quiet but steady, and the rhythm of it settled into her bones like something permanent. By early June, the beans had sprouted, and the potatoes had taken root. The drying line behind the coop stretched taut between two stakes, and her mended dresses hung there in neat rows, catching the wind. She had begun stitching a new apron from a sack she'd washed and boiled clean, and when she sewed in the evenings, Ransom would sometimes sit nearby, carving a handle for a draw knife or oiling the bridle straps. One afternoon, as she leaned over the porch rail watching a hawk wheel above the ridge, he stepped up beside her with a folded paper in hand. "Mail run came through," he said. This was in the bundle. She took it, eyeing the unfamiliar seal. The paper was stiff and creased from travel. Inside, the handwriting was tidy and slanted, signed by a Mr. Clayton Durr. She read it twice before speaking. "It's from the man I was supposed to marry." Ransom didn't shift. "He looking to make it right?" "No," she said, folding it again. "He's asking if I'd be willing to return the brooch he sent. Said it belonged to his mother." Ransom's jaw didn't move, but his voice came low. "You want to send it back?" She glanced to the bureau inside the door, where the small velvet box still sat untouched.
No.
I buried it 3 weeks ago, near the creek. He looked at her fully then. Why? Because I don't want a thing tied to a man who couldn't look me in the eye. He nodded once, slow. Then we'll leave it where it is. She let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. I don't want any part of that life following me here. You've built something different now. She turned to him. Have we? I think so, he said. If you'll have it. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers with his. I already have. That night, he cleared a space in the new room, still bare but solid, and she laid a quilt over the frame they'd built together. There was no ceremony, just the quiet act of choosing. She folded her things neatly into the chest he'd carved from alder, its hinges still stiff, and set a pressed flower between the pages of her sewing book. In the weeks that followed, the days stretched long and golden. She rose early, pulling her hair into a loose braid, and walked the rows of the garden while the dew still clung to the leaves. Ransom joined her most mornings, sometimes carrying a mug of coffee, sometimes just standing beside her as the sun cleared the ridge. One morning, as she knelt to tie up a beanstalk, he crouched beside her, drawing a small shape in the dirt with the tip of his finger. I've been thinking, he said. She looked up. About what? About what we've made here. I never thought I'd have something that felt like home again. She brushed the soil from her hands. Me neither. I want to build more. With you. She searched his face, steady now in the morning light. What do you mean? I mean I'd like to marry you.
Properly.
If you'd say yes. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood, brushing her palms on her skirt, and reached for his hand. I will, she said. But not because I need a name or a ring. Because I want to wake up beside you every morning that God gives us. He stood too, taller than her by a full head, and gathered her into his arms. I'll make you a ring from the silver I've got in the drawer, he said. Won't be fancy. I don't want fancy, she said into his shoulder. I want you. They married the next Sunday, under the cottonwood beside the creek, with Nora Talbot as witness and her 2 children holding wildflowers. Ransom wore his best shirt, and Gwendolyne stitched a blue ribbon into her hair. The vows were short, spoken in plain language, but the way they looked at each other held more truth than any sermon could summon. That night, as dusk fell soft across the hills, they sat on the porch wrapped in a shared blanket, listening to the crickets tune their song. The wind lifted the scent of cut grass and pine resin, and the stars blinked out one by one across the sky. You ever think about what comes next? She asked. He glanced at her. Every day. I want to teach. Maybe the children from the ridge. Just reading and numbers. I think I'd be good at it. You would, he said. I'll build you a little bench for them. And a shelf for books. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And you. I want to plant more than beans, he said. Grain, maybe. Something that lasts. She smiled against his coat. So do I. Years later, the cabin would stand firm through flood and frost, with his second room filled with books and laughter. A garden would bloom every spring, and the drying line would stretch farther as their lives grew to fit its breadth. They would weather years the way they weathered that first season, side by side, wordless when words weren't needed, full of the quiet strength that comes from being truly chosen. And every morning, when Gwendolyne rose and stepped into the light, Ransom would reach for her hand as if it were the first time, and she would take it as if it were the last.